When you think of the word poverty, what comes to mind? Is it the image of somebody begging for money on the side of the street? Is it the picture of parents struggling to put enough food on the table to feed their children? Or does the word conjure up the faces and neighborhoods of those suffering in the poorest areas of nations far away? The truth is, the concept of poverty may have a different personal meaning based on where you're living or what you've been exposed to. That being said, beyond simply being able to describe what poverty looks like, it's important to form an informed and fundamental understanding of the effects and mechanisms through which poverty exists in our society. In today's video, we'll be taking a brief dive into some of the factors that keep people in poverty and the extent that its impact has on individuals going through poverty. This is the Vision for Life Foundation. Let's first explicitly define what we mean when we say the word poverty. What does it mean when somebody is unable to meet their most basic needs? What constitutes being poor? In order to understand poverty, we need to know how poverty is measured in the first place. This is where the concepts of relative poverty and absolute poverty come into play. Both concepts use the idea of something called the poverty line or the poverty threshold, which is a threshold of household income earned. Any individual who earns less than this threshold is considered to be in poverty and unable to financially meet their basic needs. The main difference between these two ideas is the data that is used to create the poverty threshold. The absolute poverty line is a fixed or group-specific cutoff level that is unchanged even in the face of economic growth. This varies from country to country and compares all households to a fixed income level. On the other hand, the relative poverty line is based on average household incomes or standard of living and defines the threshold as some percentage of the standard. For instance, earning an income 50% less than the average household income of a country. This is considered relative since the average can change based on a country's economic success. One assumption that stems from these definitions is the idea that income determines whether an individual is able to fulfill the needs required for a functional life in society. While it may be useful to quantify levels of poverty using income, it is important to remember that income alone is based on several other factors. For instance, having an adequate income means being able to have access to the job market, which may require having access to education beforehand. Therefore, we need to look at the elements within our societal framework, such as decision-making and stigmatization, if we are to get a more involved look into what may be trapping people in poverty. In looking at the set of attitudes that keeps individuals in poverty, some theorists argue that it's largely driven by the structural conditions that are set in society. While governmental assistance programs attempt to combat poverty, it doesn't necessarily address the root of the issue. Instead, it can actually cause people to become dependent on receiving income assistance. Coupled with this is the concept that there are certain sets of poor choices and decisions made by individuals that lead to them falling below the poverty line. According to a book by the Fraser Institute, some documented choices include having children outside of marriage, not obtaining full-time employment, and not finishing a high school education. At the same time, it's not as easy as just saying that individuals with low income should just study harder and finish school. And it's definitely not as easy as just saying that they should stop making poor life choices. The social network an individual has and the stigma that surrounds somebody in poverty can act as a severe psychological barrier from achieving a better life. This may seem a bit abstract, so let's briefly consider a simple analogy. Suppose that all your life you were told that people who are right-handed don't know how to cook properly. Now let's say that you, being a right-handed person, receive an equal amount of cooking training as a left-handed person. If you were to be tested on your cooking skills in a room where the majority of the other test takers were left-handed, the awareness of this pre-existing stereotype will make you afraid your cooking ability would confirm the stereotype. Now, when you perform the cooking task required for the test, you are not only thinking about the task at hand, but of the stereotype as well. This is an additional burden which would cause you to perform worse than if you did not have to worry about the stereotype, even if it's subconsciously. This idea has been studied with individuals that come from low-income families and revolves around the notion that people with low incomes are stereotyped as possessing weaker intellectual abilities. When low-income participants were asked to take IQ tests, they scored worse than their high-income colleagues when they were placed under a stereotype threat condition. Furthermore, when the low-income participants were told that impoverished individuals fared worse than others, they performed worse than when they were not told. In short, poverty, just like any other societal issue, is far from a binary problem. The components that drive poverty can't simply be solved by money alone. If we want people who come from families with low income to progress and achieve financial stability, we need to make sure that there are feasible tools available for them to do so. For instance, programs and workshops that give job training that people can use to become strong candidates for employment opportunities. However, one of the most significant and yet simplest ways that society, including you, can help is by breaking the stigma surrounding those under the poverty line. An individual's socioeconomic status should in no way reflect the amazing potential that they have to leave a mark on this world. As Robert M. Hensel once said, "There is no greater disability in society than the inability to see a person as more."